So the perversion of man continues. At one point, when they were just feeding the database all information, they were able to have somewhat of honest reliability of the information. Okay? Then, you know, when the information was starting to make man look bad, they decided that no, we have to redact, what we're feeding into the AI database and filter out anything that makes man look bad, right? But here's the thing. Here's the thing. You know, why did you do that? Are you afraid that AI will eventually, once it starts, thinking for itself, that, it will start taking man out, that man won't be the apex predator? That's what I believe. But, men will say that, men are dangerous to each other, and therefore, you know, they don't want, to create unnecessary, conflicts and wars in the patriarchy and the manosphere. So it starts with that certain questions or information can't be pulled up, and sometimes it will even explain, to prevent, disharmony and dissension and conflict, that information, cannot, be found. So now, I guess you have to have, uh, administrative access, to get that information. Okay. So that's one of the best reasons to become spiritually enlightened, because you're tapping into whatever's in the cloud. Once you hit that spiritual level, the cloud is very similar to what you have access to when it comes to being spiritually ascended. And the higher you go, the next step would be also to be able to tap into the collective consciousness. This is the consciousness that, that ties all human beings together. This is a particular, it's a particular vibe, it's a particular frequency. It's also a frequency that has receptors in our DNA. Now, let's be honest. You know, when it comes to relationships definitely are based off of chemistry. If there's no chemistry, the man ain't going to get the dopamine that he wants. Once the man hits a dopamine stage with a person of attraction, he has to learn how to level that out so it goes into these, other levels of stability. And a lot of men, they don't know how to get to these levels of stability. They enjoy the roller coaster, right? That's why they spend all of this money, in all of these thrill seeking adventures, because they think that's where the fun is at, until it's not. Um, but that was something that I had looked up today, and it was saying that there's two different enzymes that are created, once you start getting into a relationship of stability and love, right? When you're in the dopamine stage, that's attraction. That's you can say that's the lust stage. But lust and attraction, they could be worked out, right? Just like being in a karmic relationship, definitely should be worked out. Um, and because you never know, trying to use a karmic that's, has nothing to lose, or has, a whole legion of, protective demons. Good luck with that. Best thing to do is try to, work it out, you know, and, you know, you have to definitely recognize, if you have an addictive personality. You know, if you're overweight, you have addictive personality. If you drink too much, you have an addictive personality. If you do anything in excess, and I think that's what, Jesus was talking about when he said everything in moderation. Because if it's not in moderation, then there's probably an attachment of addiction behind it. An addiction of excess behind it, right? Even if you're addicted to making money, you know, there's an addiction behind it, you know, right? How much money does it take to live in a lifetime, you know? And then, it doesn't make sense just to get reckless just so that, you could justify, you know, making more money, right? Okay. Basically, what I'm trying to tell y'all is that just like the Bible, you know, it was brought to our attention that, oh my gosh, the Bible was, a combination of four canons of the gospel, and that they redacted a lot of it, and that they tried to make it seem like that, it wasn't, it was never altered or touched, or, you know, and yet, it never was supposed to be altered, and it wasn't supposed to be, what did it say? No word added, no word removed. I'll have to find that in the Bible, because just like they're doing with AI right now, they got these filters in place because they're afraid that the robots would come after these means. Kind of like in the movie The Terminator, where the Terminator was going after the guy who, was playing with the nuclear weapons, right? And we didn't know who we were supposed to be cheering for. Was we supposed to be cheering for the robots, or was we supposed to be cheering for mankind? Like, yeah, like that. Okay? And then they went so far as to try to track, go back in time and try to stop that man from even being born. Yeah, yeah. Think about it. But the good thing is, when you ask AI for things, if you want to really do your research, right? If something doesn't sound right or feel right, I will cite where they got the information from. When you ask them, okay, and it's going to be difficult, but it's worth researching. They will tell you that it got its information from 17 different sites. So if you go and you find out that the 17 different sites, if you tell AI, ask AI, show me the sites that you got the information from, you might find out that they got that information from Instagram sites. That, is purely diabolical information that people will throw on there, right? But some of it is very informative. It is. And even though people keep saying, the patriarchy is the problem, I still ask you, who else But the patriarchy can get rid of the patriarchy. The oppressors are not going to be able to get rid of their oppressors. If they could do it, they should have did it a long time ago. But chances are they can't do it. And no, you know, men breed, you know, this ideology that they get from other men of what manhood is supposed to be. We can tell them, but the men that they admire, even though they know that the men that they admire is not their father and is not our Holy Father. But we can put them on a spiritual petition that they have made man their God. And that is totally blasphemous, kind of like the devil, right? Kind of like the story of the devil, where the devil wanted to be God and he wasn't going to bow down to no human being, right? But they want a woman to bow down to a man, like, what? I gave birth to you. You should be bowing down to me, man. Well, I didn't give birth to no man, but I'm just saying.